All right. We're gonna try to do captions because we wanna be accessible. Okay. So hello everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Anna. I'm a designer based in New York City. Um, when I introduce myself like that, it's usually followed up by, well, what kind of a designer are you? And I would say I'm an industrial designer. But a lot of people don't quite know what that means because now it's almost always expected that you have a specialty. I generally don't like being identified as what my current position is at work, mainly because I think I'm more than the company that I work for. And I know that's irrelevant right now since I work for myself. But before, when I was working for startups, it gave me anxiety that the success or failures of those companies would really dictate how my resumes were going to be read in the future. So, what I would rather happen is for people to identify me based on the work that I do. So, I listen carefully to what they say. And these are the things that they've called me in the past. They've called me an artist. I make book sculptures, like paper engineering type of stuff. Um, a furniture and housewares designer, like a lot of industrial designers do this. A jewelry designer, which is kind of like one of the top things that people say about me, especially if you know me from Seattle. I'm a design strategist, and I have experience in wearable tech designer and also in UX design. I'm also an environmental designer, which is actually side note. I didn't even know that this is what wayfinding design is called. I thought environmental designer in the context of design is, or in big picture design is more like designing the environment. Um, and I'm also a creative director and a community builder. This is a design competition that I co-founded in Seattle a couple of years back to hack the urban infrastructure to make the lives of people experiencing homelessness a little bit easier. I created the brand and identity of it. So they call me a branding designer also. And lastly, for me personally, I want to call myself a rebel because I actually participated in that design competition and did some stuff around the city, like posted stickers and did my own hack. Um, and yeah, I think a lot of people also would associate me as a graphic designer. I make a lot of posters, and as of recently, I've been called a scientist. I'm part of Association of Filipino Scientists in America, and I've been dabbling a lot in social sciences like urban studies and economics recently. But none of that feels quite right. I'm sure I'm not the only one here who had some form of existential crisis this year. And during my existential crisis, the questions that kept coming back to me are centered on how we design and build products and experiences. Like, where is the humanity in human centered design? This book is kind of the Bible of ergonomics, which gave birth to the whole human centered design buzzword that we hear all the time. But it's a collection of data set gathered from the military back in World War II. And I just like to put it out there and question, like, does it actually reflect the measure of men and women now? Like, how relevant is it? Or who is the user in user experience? There's this famous marketing story of like a CEO of dog food company. He would demonstrate that he will actually eat their dog food because it's so good that if it's good enough for a human to eat, it's good enough for dogs too. And it's a really effective marketing tool because all of us as consumers would support products if the people behind those products actually use them too, right? So conversely, we will not use products if people building and developing those products will not use them. Well, this is kind of what's happening in Silicon Valley. There's an interesting study where it's actually people in the digital product industry, user experience designers. They're the ones that enroll their kids in schools that don't use much technology. And they're the kind of parents that limit their children's screen time also. For me, that's a big red flag and a symptom that there's something wrong in how we design products and create products. It's like we're designing them to be addictive. And I don't know where the user is, where the user is in that user experience term. So these are the kinds of that Gloriana and I would talk about when we were together. And so we coined the term human experience. And to me, it's a practice of solutions based design that pursues to enrich human lives, not just the end user, all the humans that would interact with the solution. It's also solutions driven, that it cares less about what medium the end product is, but more about the effectiveness of the solution itself. So one of the big problems that I want to tackle in life, kind of like a big life goal, is sustainability and anything related to environmental issues. And 2 years ago, when I was doing my post-baccalaureate at Columbia for urban studies, my studio was assigned to research and explore this neighborhood, Port Morris. It's in the South Bronx. It's just a little bit more south of AOC's district. The first time we did a walkthrough of it was a weekend in September, and the streets were absolutely empty. But surprisingly, it still was not walkable. It's not pedestrian friendly. This photo of a white bicycle is a reminder that it's also not for bicyclists. There were plenty of walls and fences and intimidating buildings and structures. There's like cool nooks and crannies, but and you can see the potential there. But otherwise, it's very intimidating. And it's unfortunate because it's actually right at the waterfront, but people don't have access to that waterfront. It's also not very it's also not very good for pedestrians because the closest the subway station is not very um, close to it. You have to walk quite a distance. It's like further than the regular distances of subways in Manhattan. So I kept going back to Port Morris to rediscover its history, and we even walk along the path of Randall's Island. Randall's Island is kind of like the little, like the island here that's separated by a little creek. It's only about 20 feet away from Port Morris, and from Randall's Island, what what I concluded is that Port Morris is much better to look at from a distance, but being inside the actual neighborhood is kind of a different story. And what stuck out to me is that you feel the thickness of the air when you're walking down. At first, I didn't know if this was something I had imagined, but after doing more research about the neighborhood, these are some fascinating numbers I'd like to share with you. So the population of Port Morris, and I included Hunts Point here, is only 14,000 people. But in that little patch of land, it handles a third of New York City's garbage, and there's 7,000 tons of garbage that goes through it on a daily basis. That's 1,400 garbage trucks. Basically, every minute there's 3 garbage trucks that passes by on the streets of Port Morris. So this is really bad because the rate of asthma in this area is insane. 1 out of 2 people who dies from asthma, like an asthma related illness in New York State, actually lives in New York City, and half of those come from this area. The invisibility of air pollution makes it one of those problems that we all know or is like really big, but we don't actually feel its severity because it's such a slow moving problem. And as humans, we tend to discount the value of the future while we're in the present. So we sweep this under the rug, but there's multiple solutions to this issue depending on what your specialty is. So, like, a UX designer would probably create an app that measures air quality and then create a product like an air filter. And just a side note, these are not actually my products. These are the only 2 images in this presentation that I did not make. And like, you can team this up with an industrial designer and engineers, and they create sensors and an Internet of Things product to make all of this measurement more precise. A politician would address this problem by creating policies, probably taxing the externalities of the factories or creating tax breaks if they outfit their system to be more environmentally friendly. And urban planners would propose green spaces. Architects and real estate developers would build LEED certified buildings. Graphic designers and strategists would perhaps rebrand the whole of Port Morris to make it more of a place worth visiting and exploring. And maybe there might be a media campaign to create public awareness on the immediacy of the support that we need for this issue. So I wanted to show you like kind of like a high level of what I had proposed when I was working on it. Keep in mind that this is a project that only lasted for 4 weeks while I was in school. So this is exhausted, refueled, and empowered. it's exhausted back to it like heavy research. I mapped out and visualized the problems of Port Morris. This is mapping. So Port Morris is kind of like the borderline here of the freeway, and all of these marked buildings are either waste facilities, powerhouses, or some corporate warehouse. um, the recycling centers are there too, but it's Port Morris is really just kind of like a one stop before the garbage ends up in the landfill upstate or in New Jersey. And all of these corporate warehouses, they deliver food everywhere in the city, or like anything that you might order. Like FedEx is there. So like whenever you buy, like go online shopping, it goes through Port Morris. Um, a fun fact that I learned from a friend that works at the mayor's office is that if Hunts Point ever shuts down, the city will only have less than 2 weeks worth of food in everyone's pantry or cupboard. So that's really important that like this neighborhood right here, it's so important for me to reiterate how like this is kind of like the heart of the city, if anything. Like this is like we can't live without it if it doesn't function. Um So what I found here is that it isn't necessarily though that the actual buildings are the ones that causes the issues. It's the vehicles that go to and from those buildings. So to prove a point, I timed and documented how many trucks passes through this intersection at the entrance of Port Morris for the 90 seconds that a pedestrian walks by. And this was in no way peak hours. I believe it was in the middle of the day, and I think I counted about like 16 trucks going on just that one 90-second time frame. And the data shows that there's 18,000 trucks per day that goes through Port Morris and Hunts Point. And if you remember the other slides, there's only 14,000 people that live in Port Morris. So it's really astounding. Like it's basically, there's more trucks in this neighborhood than people. And if you can imagine the kind of exhaust that comes out of all of these vehicles, this is why it is not healthy. Um, so from all of this information, oh no, one of my images isn't showing. But so from all of this information, I decided to hone in on reducing the transportation of goods through trucks and proposed other potentials. So this is a really creepy Google Earth stalking that ended up kind of identifying potential sites for marinas, that are still salvageable, like they still have the foundation, and they may still be able to handle ferry traffic. So this is mapping out all of the truck traffic and the freeways in Port Morris and Hunts Point. The top illustration there is the current network of roads that go through all of the buildings and warehouses and powerhouses of the neighborhood. And the points there are kind of like my what do you call it, like my point of intervention. Those are the places where we saw potential for like marina spaces. And the bottom illustration is kind of like what it would look like if instead of driving trucks to deliver to these areas, we used ferry systems instead. So we would not need all of the road network that you see all the way up top if we just depend on actually using ferries. So instead of that like super clustered network, this is essentially what I propose the city would look like. And those three marina points are kind of really on in the center of the most trafficked warehouses and powerhouses. All the way to the right there is Hunts Point, which is like where all of the food in New York City ends up going. And these are like proposing like what if barges were the ones that go in there instead. And so I looked up like the most common barge sizes, and the number that you see there is the capacity in tons of what they can actually accommodate as far as weight is concerned. So 7 full trips can replace all the garbage trucks coming through the South Bronx. That's, I don't have the number. That's like 14, 18,000. Oh, I think it would replace 14,000 trucks in a day if they were to rotate it in like every hour. But yeah, so this is a very, very big project. Um, but like one of the issues here is really kind of how do you make people feel or see or experience like the severity of the issue. And like fortunately I had this opportunity to actually be one of the artists for this show, Data Through Design. It was hosted by New York City, partnered with Pratt Institute, and they chose 9 designers, and they accepted my proposal, where basically I had modeled what it would feel like if you were to see the pollutants in the air. Like how claustrophobic would you actually feel if you go through this like tiny little hallway, and knowing that these particles that you don't see can impact so much of your health. And so this is, it's basically like a 3D representation or a 3D model of what that airspace is going to be like. I'm a little bit out of time, but I want to give you a little bit of a takeaway here on what I think the design industry should kind of move towards. And maybe like some of you are not in design, but I think that one thing that we should really do when it comes to big global issues is to embrace being a generalist. I think that we've become so hyper specialized, and I just don't believe that innovation can stem out of knowing something, of like mastering a specialty. I think that pointing on to number 2, collaboration over competition, is that we learn so much from integrating and accepting that we don't know anything, and asking people who have other skills, especially when it comes to really big issues. Everyone has different solutions, but like I think that like big problems need a really unified collaboration effort for it to really pursue things. Um, with that said, I want to close with this quote that I found today. He is by an architect, Luis Barragan. Don't ask me about this building or that one. Don't see what I do, see what I see. And this is kind of my way of pushing for people to, for all of us. I think that it's so cool to work for a mission driven company, but what's even better is to be mission driven yourself. And I think that everything that we say and we preach, we need to really practice it in our daily lives and in our own fields. And yeah, like try to work so hard that people around you know exactly what your vision is for the world, and maybe get support in that sense. Um, thank you so much. With that, we're going to open it up for our questions sections.